All right, welcome to day 5, and today we're going to get into calculating the area of a square. So we're going to build a little program that will take two pieces of input from the user, and those inputs that we'll take from the user will be two numbers, and then we'll take those numbers and we will use them to calculate the area of a square or a rectangle. Since we're taking two numbers, it could be a square or a rectangle. But to get the area of a rectangular shape, you take the height and you multiply it times the width, and that becomes the area. So we're going to take those two numbers from the user, we're going to multiply them together, and then we will reflect back to the user what the answer to their problem was. So let's create a new file here, and I'm going to call this O5 calculator, or just O5 calc.py, and that will remind me that this is for day 5 of our little coding journey here. And so when we create a program in the command line like this, it's good to do some things to sort of spruce it up a little bit. Now, obviously, we don't have graphics or anything really exciting, but what we can do is create a fun little user interface. And so I'm going to show you a couple of tricks with strings that will allow us to create this user interface. And so we're going to print a few lines here that just sort of say, welcome to my calculator. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to say our user interface is going to be 40 characters across. The reason that matters is that it sort of creates a 40 character line width. And if we standardize on that, then everything sort of lines up the way we want it to. And that'll make more sense here in just a minute. But here's trick number 1. You're familiar with the print function. And if we print a string like this, then it just prints one of those. But here's something fun we can do with the print function is I can actually take, let's say I've got the hashtag in here. Now let's use the percent sign. So I'm going to print 1% sign here, just like that. But if I want to print more than 1% sign, let's say I want to print a line of 40 of those, instead of just saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and counting out 40 of those, which is kind of tedious, I can just print 1 and I can say times 40 and watch what happens. Boom. There are 40 of those across now. Now, typically in a Python program, the standard line width is 80. We're going to use 40 because we're just kind of doing a little program here. And so it's the mini version of this. So I'm going to leave that. And then I'm going to copy that line and we'll print 2 of those. And in between that, I want to print something else. I want to print another string. And if I say I want 2 of these, and then I want plus, and I'm going to say rectangle area calculator. There we go. Calculator. I got it. Finally. All right. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to put 2 more of these. Well, let's put them in a string so that it works properly. So what I've done is I've used plus signs to glue those strings together. That's different than using commas in between them because it doesn't insert any spaces. But if I do that, notice it looks kind of not great. But watch what I can do. So if I've got these 2 characters here and these 2 characters here, I know that my line width is 40. So if I subtract those 4 characters from the rest of the line, I know there's 36 characters left. And there's a really easy trick you can do that's called center. And if I type center and I type 36, watch what happens. Boom. It centers this string in a line of 36 spaces. So that plus the spaces on either side of it take up 36, and these other two, of course, make it a total of 40, which means it is a nice even line. Now it sort of looks like something. It's not as cool as graphics, of course, but it has a little old school kind of flair to it, and that's kind of nice. So we'll leave that. And then once I've printed sort of my welcome screen, if you will, what I can do is I can print, and I'm going to give the user their instructions. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say enter the height and width of your rectangle, and I will tell you the area. Rectangle, there we go. And so if I print that, it's past this line here. So let's use the triple quote trick here. Triple quotes at the beginning and the end. And now I can just divide it up like this. And there we go. And if I wanted this, if I wanted these centered, I could do it another way. I could print and then hit a new line in there and close that. And then I'm going to say center in 40, and then I'm going to say plus. Let's get this back up here, this other one. Rectangle, and I will tell you the area, and I'm going to center that in 40 as well. And now, watch what I can do. Oop, what do we got going on there? Oh, rectangle is supposed to be up on the first part. That's why the second part is too long. So let's move that up there. Let's try it again. I don't like that either. Let's put it back down here. Okay, so something's going a little weird with this, but easy problem to solve. I'll just give that its own print, and we'll get rid of the new line character in there. And that is a little bit better. The problem with this that I'm seeing is that we've got exactly 39 characters in that. And so it's a little bit off center, which is a little funky to the eye, but we're going to let that one slide. I could go back up here and play around with these. And in fact, here's an interesting thing we can do. Let's go back to the top here. And I'm going to create a new variable, a new type of variable. Call it int line width. I'm just going to call it int LW for short. And I'm going to say, let's start the line width at 40, just for fun. And now, instead of using the line width in all of these places, this is that minus 4, right? And that's this, and that's this. So now, there's the line width in all of those places. Remember, since this contains 40, it's just like putting 40 in all of these spaces. So there, it does the exact same thing. But now watch what I can do. If I want it to look a little bit better, I can change the line width to 60. And now that looks a little bit nicer because it's a little spread out. You can't tell that it's one space greater on one side than the other. So That's another thing you can do that's kind of interesting. So let's keep that because I like that there. And let's now, I'm going to print one new line character and give us a little bit of space. But now we need to get the length and width, the height and width of the rectangle from the user. So I'm going to enter this as a float. Okay. And so what we're going to have to do here is convert these, because whenever a user enters anything in, it's a string. So let's start with a string. String height equals input, enter the height. All right, and then we'll go enter str width, input, enter the width. Okay, so now that we have both of those, we need to remember that they are strings. And unfortunately, you can't do math with a string, because remember, a string is just a list of characters. So Python doesn't understand that a string is a list of characters. We need to change what's called the data type. And we've seen some different data types already. So we've got an integer here. Int is a number without a decimal. Now, technically, somebody could enter 20.5 for the height, and it would still be a valid thing to say. So we're going to use a different kind of number type called a float. And a float gives us the ability to have decimals. So what we need to do is convert string height and string width to a float. And so the way I do that is pretty easy. There's actually a function for this. So if I say fl height, so I'm indicating by the variable name here that it's going to be a float, equals float str height, and fl width equals float str width. Now I have something we can do math on. Okay, and if they happen to enter just 20 or 60, whatever, an integer, it'll be fine, because a float can handle an integer. A float can be a number with or without a decimal. Although if you enter 20 and you do something with a float, or you turn it into a float, it will change it to 20.0, but we know that that means the same thing. So it's totally fine. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to do our calculation, right? So I'm going to put some comments in my code so that I know what I'm doing here. And comments are just a great way of keeping track of what you're doing in each part of your program, so that you can remember later, or if you're sharing that program with somebody else, so that they can see what it is you're doing. So if I say hashtag, or the number sign, at the start of my line, then I'm going to type whatever I want. So I'm going to set the line width. Now, notice this is not Python code, and if I type it without the number sign in front of it, it underlines it because that produces an error. But if I leave that number sign in front of it, basically what that means is ignore everything that comes after this when you're executing the program. So you can use this to leave little notes for yourself. So I'm going to say, welcome the user, and right here I'm going to say get user input, and then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to convert input to float. Okay, after that, let's do the math. Calculation, there we go. And so I'm going to create a new variable, fl result, or I'm going to say FL area, because that's what I'm calculating, equals FL width times FL height. There it is. And then I'm going to print the result. Next. And so if I want to print the result, print the area of your rectangle is, okay, and I can easily insert that using an F string. So FL area. Now this is one place where an F string is superior, because an F string allows me to just inject, even though that's not a string, it's a float, I can put that number right in there and it works just fine. However, and if it was a string, right, I can add it to this. str height works just fine, but watch what happens when I use the float. If I use FL area, it's going to underline that. It's going to say, I'm not sure that's going to work. And the problem is it won't work because what I'm doing is I'm adding a string to a float, and you can't do that because Python doesn't know what to do with that. It can't do math with a string, and so using that plus sign there doesn't make sense. So what you want to do anytime you want to put a data type other than string together with another string is you always want to use an F string, and that's why we use those. And so now let's give our program a little shot here and see how it works. So there's my rectangle area calculator. I've got all of these nice things going on here. And I'm going to enter the height. And let's do width is 10.4. And the area of my rectangle is 208.0. And so there you go. There is my rectangle area calculator. And that's how we do it. And there is one small weakness in this calculator, and I want to point it out to you by showing it to you, that if I say this instead of typing a number, I mean, I know this is a number. I know the number 10 is equivalent to the word 10. They mean the same thing in my mind, but you'll see what happens in just a second. 10 times 5, we know is 50, but watch what happens. I get an error in here that says, hey, wait a minute, we can't do that. And as we get a little deeper into our coding projects, I'm going to show you with some progressive lessons how to what I would call user-proof your programs. But right now we're going to start with the basics, and we're going to do something you should never do in software development, and that is we're going to assume that your users know how to enter the data properly. You should never assume that, because most of the time when you assume that, you're going to wind up with a program that just crashes all the time. So we need to always protect ourselves from that. But here in the beginning stages, we're just playing around and we're creating little programs that are here to teach us stuff. So we're not going to worry too much about user input yet. But we will get to the place where we're protecting ourselves against bad user input.